Hey folks, I'm Angela Taylor, your host for Unlocking the Club. And today I want to actually talk about staying true to yourself. This is actually a topic I spent a lot of time reflecting on during the past weekend after reading a really great article that I'll share with you, and then having an insightful conversation with a bright young leader. So as many of you know, I spent about 20 years as an executive in sports and entertainment, predominantly with the WNBA. I was with the WNBA league office for about 10 years before running 3 different WNBA teams, the Minnesota Lynx, the Washington Mystics, and then eventually the Atlanta Dream. And one of the things that I loved about my experience with the WNBA was the people that I had the opportunity to work with in the offices and with the teams and the players. There are some incredible women playing in the WNBA, and the opportunity to interact with them away from the court was always something that I treasured. But there's one particular young lady who was phenomenal. And I remember quite poignantly the first time I had a chance to interact with her. It was Sylvia Falls. And Sylvia is someone who has had a long and very successful WNBA career, successful Olympic career, and successful basketball career in totality. And she's about to retire from the WNBA after racking up so many records and so many championships with the Minnesota Lynx. I met Sylvia, I want to say it's maybe her sophomore year in college when she was playing at LSU. And my first interaction with Sylvia is something that was quite tangible. She just had this spirit, this energy, this positivity that was palpable. And she had this sweet, pleasant demeanor that everyone gravitated toward. And everyone called her like a big teddy bear. They got to know her as Big Syl. And she recently actually started asking people to call her Sweet Syl instead of Big Syl. Because despite the fact that she was 6'5", one of the formidable post players in the WNBA, she had this sweet temperament that was, again, someone that you always wanted to be around, someone that you gravitated toward. Well, there was an amazing article in ESPN recently about Sylvia, and it talked about her on the eve of her retirement, about obviously the accolades and the accomplishments that she had as a professional women's basketball player. But in that article and in all the conversations that she's had with so many, she wanted to not emphasize what she did on the basketball court, but she wanted to talk about who she was, right? And she wanted to stay true to herself. And in this article, it talks about how her goal after the WNBA is to be a mortician. And it's something that probably many of us like me pause when we hear that, like, right, like professional athlete to mortician doesn't seem like the traditional career path. But she talks about how since she was a young girl, how she always has been fascinated about death. And not in the way that we think about death here in the United States, but in the way that death is about celebrating these souls as they grace the earth and how we can celebrate them as they move on to their next chapter. And in the article, it talks a lot about, as a little kid, she would play dolls or different games with her siblings and friends. But the deal was that she also needed her friends or siblings to play funeral with her as well, which feels kind of morbid to most of us here in the United States that have a different relationship with death than they do at different places across the globe. But just reading that article and listening to Sylvia's clarity about who she was, what she has always been passionate about, and what she wants to do in her future was really touching to me for so many reasons. And it was a great example and illustration of how important it is to stay true to yourself, despite the fact that others may be telling you otherwise. They may be questioning what it is that you are dreaming about or your goals are. But you have to stay true to yourself. And there's those moments and those messages that we receive along the way that tell us what it is that we're passionate about. It may not tell us this specific job that we want to go after, but it can tell us the essence of what's important to us. And so that article that we'll share with you in the show notes was something that resonated with me because it was so unique and it was such a unique perspective from an athlete who we always say, elite athletes die 2 deaths. The first is when they transition from being an elite athlete into the next life because they've had to be focused on sports for so long. So much of their career has simply been focused on being the best player that they can be, that making that transition to the next thing is really challenging. But it was really interesting to see that Sylvia was able to stay true to herself. So I read that article, and about 24 hours later, I had a really unique conversation with a recent college graduate who is a talented and bright young woman who was just talking about the pressure to conform and the pressure to perform. And we talked about how important it has been for me throughout my life to reflect on, again, staying true to myself and what is important to me, so that when you have that pressure, particularly that external pressure that shows up, that sometimes like you may feel compelled to come outside of your comfort zone, right, in a way that's growing you, but you have to make sure that whatever that pressure that is being applied to you still allows you to stay true to yourself. And so the advice that I had for this young woman was that pause that you can take to reflect, to make sure that you're in alignment with who you want to be, who you are, why you're on this journey, can be the most important element of your day or your week or your year. And someone really profound told me about that years ago when I was in a transition period with my career. And I had lunch with a colleague, and over lunch, he said to me, and he was amazed at the fact that I'd gone from one job to the next, right? So when I left the WNBA league office, I left on a Friday, and that next Monday, I was in Minneapolis getting ready to start my job as vice president of business operations with the Minnesota Lynx. And most of my career, I had been doing that. Like I was in my term at a particular location on a Friday, and then that next Monday would get started. And it was a sense of pride for me. But for the first time in my life, as I was getting ready to start my consulting business, I had a gap. And this gentleman, Dan Hughes is his name. He was a coach and a general manager in the WNBA. He said to me, he's like, Angela, a pause will be the most important part of your life. And I think that that is true. And so I ask you, do you take the time to pause? Because it's in those pauses that we can reflect on what it would be to require us to stay true to ourselves. We'll be able to make sure that everything that we're doing is serving our mission and our purpose. We'll actually allow space in to pause and counsel with some good friends, or as a good friend of mine calls it, our team of allies or your board of directors. It's in that pause that you are able to take a moment to make sure that in this busy world that we're working in, when we're so focused on action as action-oriented individuals, and we're so focused on results in this results-driven world, that we can make sure that we're calibrating and staying true to ourselves, as Sylvia was able to do for so long, inside of all the success that she was having for her career. So just asking you, are you staying true to yourself? What can you do to make sure that you are living your purpose on a daily basis? And are you taking the time to pause, to reflect in the moments that you need to? That's just a little bit about unlocking the club and staying true to yourself. But in today's episode, we might get into that a little bit more, but I'm really excited about this conversation because we have some special guests. Our special guests on today's episode of Unlocking the Club are the co-hosts of the Cultivating Her Space podcast, Dr. Dominique Broussard and Terri Lomax.
Welcome to the Unlocking the Club podcast, where we host honest and direct conversations about journeys of access, personal truth, and reclaiming space. We share our truth so that you can find the key to own your truth, honor your journey, and reclaim your space. Grab your keys, your wallet, your phone, and invite your friends to meet you at the club. Here's your host, Angela Taylor.
Today on Unlocking the Club, I'll be joined by the co-hosts for the Cultivating Her Space podcast, Terri Lomax and Dr. Dominique Broussard. Terri Lomax is a globally recognized podcaster, speaker, and brand strategist. The founder and visionary for the Mocha Girls Pit Stop blog and co-founder of the Cultivating Her Space podcast, Terri empowers entrepreneurs to leverage social media and personal branding to grow their audience, impact, and their bank accounts. Dr. Dominique Broussard is a psychologist and college professor and has spent her graduate and professional career working on college campuses in Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, and California in both counseling and classroom spaces. Her passion is finding ways to make mental health a priority, especially for young Black women. I'm so excited to be in conversation today with the co-hosts of the Cultivating Her Space podcast, Dr. Dominique Broussard and Terri Lomax. Thanks for tuning in. Hello, Dr. Dominique Broussard and Terri. How are you both doing?
Wonderful. Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Oh, it is so wonderful to have you both on the show. I have to say, little fangirl moments. I've listened to the Cultivating Her Space podcast, and I just really appreciate the candor and honesty and insights that you share with your guests in such a fun, inviting way in each and every episode.
Thank you so much. It's definitely our baby. We often say that we are co-parents of the podcast. So thank you, Angela. That means a lot.
You're welcome. Terri, starting with you, I'm actually just curious. So we just heard your bio and about the work that you're doing and about your podcast. But I would love to have you tell us a little bit more about the person behind all of those amazing achievements and those titles.
Yes. So I would say that's a wonderful question. I would say that outside of all of the titles, I am a resilient, curious soul that just wants to make the world a better place. I'm really interested in the legacy that I leave and just really being my best self in all areas of life. And so that's who I am behind the scenes, behind the podcast. And I think a lot of the work that we do is fueled by my desire to just introspect and get to know myself more and figure out how to share that with our community, in addition to Dom's passions and the value that she brings to the table.
You know, you said the word introspect, and that's something that I don't think that we talk about enough or understand the practice of it. Can you just give us a little bit more about introspection?
Yes, but Angela, can we cuss on your podcast, or is this like a...
It's all. This is
okay. I just had to make sure.
You want to be real. We are real here on Unlocking the Club. So thank you for asking.
You are so welcome, because we be cussing, as you know, on our podcast. So I'm like, I don't want to come and be, y'all be like, she unprofessional. But I would say for me, introspection, the best way I can describe it is just me being radically honest and real with myself, but also holding space to be silent. For a long time, based on me having such a tough upbringing and not liking myself for so long, I was so uncomfortable being by myself, and I would miss those opportunities to get epiphanies or to get revelations or to get creative ideas. And so for me, introspection means being still. It means sitting with the discomfort of whatever may come up when you're by yourself. And so that's what it means to me today.
Yeah, well, we hear so much about mindfulness, right? And so few of us are taught how to be introspective. Like even when we may be doing it at an early stage in our lives, we're not taught how to do that in a powerful way. So I appreciate you introducing that into today's conversation. We'll delve into that a little bit more as well. Dr. Dom, so tell us a little bit more about who you are behind, right, all the amazing things that you're doing and impacting, particularly young Black women and women of color around mental health.
I would say that behind the scenes, I am a warm and caring person, but I also embody what or at least I work hard at embodying what we talk about on the podcast in the term that we've trademarked called Blatchet. So I wholeheartedly embrace being a little bit mix of bougie, classy, and ratchet. And I think that makes for a really well-rounded and healthy human being.
I love that. So full disclosure, when the first time I saw Blatchet, like when I was first watching the podcast, I was like, okay, let me Google this, right? Like, cause I had not heard of that. And then like started listening to episodes, and I appreciate like bringing your full self, like all of those things. And I think so often as Black women, we are put in containers of how we have to show up in certain spaces, how you show up in the classroom, how you show up in the boardroom, right? There's limitations on us being our full selves. And there's also expectations that we all act the same. And that is not the case. So tell me more about Blatchet. Like, how do we tap into our inner Blatchet?
Well, I think what it really is about acknowledging that you are a multifaceted woman, that you can enjoy gospel music. Like on Sunday mornings, I will do like a Peloton yoga workout where it's all gospel music. But maybe the night before, I was out with my girlfriends and we were having some drinks and we might have been getting some twerking in, and really embracing that and being okay with that and recognizing that the only person who can limit how you show up is you.
We said being okay with that. And for both of you, I'm curious, was there a point in your journey where you weren't okay with it? And why was that?
Oh, yeah. I think that early in my career, I was taught as a therapist that there was a certain way that you had to show up. And it was coming from a Western male perspective, middle class male perspective. And it meant that there was going to be a lot of code switching. For a good part of my career, there was a lot of code switching, particularly if I was the only Black person in that space. So just not in the professional sense, just not feeling comfortable to show up as my full self. And as I've grown and gotten deeper into my career, and just started to really recognize and embrace the importance of being my full self, I show up in workspaces as my full self. Obviously, there are certain professional standards that we have to adhere to. Like, I'm not going to have in a therapy session, I'm not going to twerk with my client in a therapy session. That's inappropriate. But we might have a full conversation about what that means for that client to find time for them to twerk and what that looks like in their day-to-day life and how that's a part of self-care.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I want to share mine, but Dom has a really good story about when she was recently interviewing and what you said in the interview, Dom. I think that's really powerful. Can you share that?
Oh, yes. So thank you for reminding me.
You're
that.
welcome.
In a recent job interview, one of the things that they asked at the end of the, we'd gone through this full process. And at the end of the interview, one of the things that they asked was, is there anything else that you want us to know or you'd like us to know about you? And essentially, I told them that I am unapologetically Black and I am here for Black folks. And for me, what that meant was that felt like a really empowering moment to share that in the job interview, because it felt like I was fully showing up as myself. And if they decided not to hire me, then that, to me, that said that that's not the place that I need to be then, because I can't be my full self.
It was so important, right? Because I think we all talk about being unapologetic, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we're selective of when that actually shows up. We actually had a guest, Cherie Buckner-Webb, who was one of the first, or is the first Black senator or representative from Idaho, was on our show last week and talked about, like, as she was in the legislature, how so often folks were like, well, we don't think of you as Black. And she was like, well, look, I am Black. And so I need you to see me as being Black. Being Black and Black and beautiful, Black and brilliant, Black and powerful. So I love, Dr. Dominique, that was part of the discourse of, this is who I am and you're hiring me for this reason.
Yes.
I'm so glad she shared that. I thought that was such an inspiring story too. And I will say, Angela, I grew up as a church girl. Like, my family was very religious, in church on Sundays, Wednesday for Bible study. Pop was a bishop, my mom a pastor. Like, I was in church. My grandparents used to say I was born on the pulpit. And so because of that, I believe that growing up, I really felt conflicted internally oftentimes, because I was told to live a certain way, but I would see different things that other people were doing, like in my family, that I'm like, we said this on Sunday, but then I see this is happening throughout the week. And then I feel like, for as long as I can remember, I've had these, I want to say, Blatchet proclivities, right? Where I'm like, I realized that I was multifaceted, but I didn't know how to share those other parts of myself in a way that felt comfortable for me. So then I found myself denying aspects of myself, or pretending, or faking, or being a chameleon, just sort of adopting the attitudes and personas of those that I was around. And so I would say that as of late, becoming a mother, I have a 16-month-old, so becoming a mother, being a wife for nearly 7 years, learning myself and my body more, I am definitely leaning into Blatchet more. So when we decided to start our podcast, cussing on the podcast in a public forum was huge for me, because before that I had this very, I would say, clean, polished image, and I didn't want people to see me as unprofessional. But I've posted videos of me twerking on my Instagram, because I'm now in a space where I'm more comfortable and I can have that dialogue after they see the twerking video about, okay, let's talk about how we are multifaceted and we are multidimensional. Everyone doesn't have to twerk on their Instagram, but I'm comfortable doing that sometimes, right? So that's been my journey.
Well, I love what both of you are saying. First, Blatchet proclivities. Okay, you need to coin that. That needs to be another bag, whatever it is. Like, right, we need to start the list. What are your Blatchet proclivities? Because it is so exhausting code switching, like Dr. Damas, as you talked about. And I think we all get into the practice of that for most of our lives, like whether it is, what you do on the weekend and then how you show up in the workplace on a Monday, or even sometimes of like what family members you're with. Like, right, if you are with your aunties that are church going, and then when you're with your cousins, like maybe you're acting a little bit differently, and understanding the nuances behind all of that, but also getting to the point where you don't have to separate and compartmentalize all those things, because it is extremely exhausting. And I remember years ago when Oprah was getting ready to go through and stop her show, and she was having that Oprah behind the scenes, she talked about turning 50, right? And how powerful it was when she turned 50, because she just didn't give any F's, like, right? Like, I don't care. This is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. And so, Terri, I'll start with you. Like, how do we get to that point before we turn 50? How do we actually start to operate and navigate the space with our Blatchet proclivities at an earlier stage?
Well, I'm still discovering that in full transparency, but I've grown so much on the journey. And I think it's all about the journey and the growth and the actual journey, like not necessarily the destination, but what we're learning along the way. I used to say when I was younger that I felt like I was a prisoner of the opinions of others, because I cared so deeply about what everyone thought. And oftentimes I would be trying to make people happy, or denying myself of either opportunities or expressing myself truly because I wanted to make sure that everyone was pleased. And so I would say it definitely is a journey. I think the first step is really sitting with yourself and understanding, what do I want to do? Why do I want to do it? Right? Like, who am I outside of my marriage, outside of my relationship or my friendship, or, me being a mother, whatever that is, who am I? And I think that that's what I found to be super valuable, is understanding who I am. What do I want to do? Why do I want to do that? And as long as I have my own reasoning and I'm grounded in my decision, I found that for me, it allows me to show up more powerfully and honestly and unapologetically, because I know my why, and I'm not just out here kind of going with the wind and, just being super fickle and not really understanding why I'm even doing what I'm doing, if that makes sense.
100%. It's, as you were speaking, it reminded me of years ago when I graduated from undergrad, having a conversation with my mother. And one of the things I share with our listeners all the time is the inspiration for the show was the last 7 years I had with my mother before she passed, and the conversations we were able to have, and how revealing she was in those conversations in a way she was not previously. And I remember a conversation we had years ago where she said she was just starting to find out who she was again, because she, for 20 plus years, I have 2 older brothers, she had been so-and-so's mom, right? And she'd lost her sense of who she was beyond all of that, which I think can be challenging. So for you, Terri, as someone who has children, and Dr. Dom, like for you, someone that is probably in that space having these conversations as well, how do you not get lost in all the things that we have to do and still remain true to ourselves?
I would say for me, again, spending that time with myself, and I watched other women also lose themselves in their relationships with their children. And I saw what it did to them. And one of the things that kind of makes me a little teary-eyed is, I watched my grandmother, bless her heart, she's passed away now, but support my grandfather's dreams, like wholeheartedly, raise her grandchildren because for whatever reasons, their parents weren't there, right? And I saw that she went to the grave with so many dreams and goals and desires. And that to me said something. And for me, that was like, you know what? That means that I need to prioritize myself. I need to be in relationship with myself. I need to be a person outside of my marriage, outside of my child. And so I make it known. So for me, that's self-care. I know for some people, depending on your perspective of motherhood and how this looks, I know some people are like, oh, she's out and about. Like I flew down to spend the weekend with Dom a couple weekends ago and we had a ball. We posted videos on social media. We went to brunch. We had such a good time. And that was important for me to do that as a mom, to step away and have time for myself because I don't want to get to that space. I'm sure there are some parts that are so ingrained, like we're so ingrained in our relationships with our family and friends, but it's important for me to still have that identity outside of that so that I don't get to that place later where I'm an empty nester and I'm like, well, who am I now?
Dr. Dom, how about yourself?
Yeah, what I like to tell folks, and I try to do this for myself too, is this concept. We always talk about it is like, when you're on the airplane, they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first before you help others. And so what I tell people all the time is, you can't take care of anyone else around you if you aren't taking care of yourself first, right? If your cup is empty, you have nothing to pour from, right? I'm not a mom, but I'm an auntie. And I try to make sure that I keep my cup full. And, I try to be intentional about the things that I do that fill my cup. And so it's a range of things that I might do on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, quarterly, yearly. So that recognizing that depending on where you are in life and what your circumstances are, there's always something that you can do to fill your cup so that you can show up. And I think, when I look at a lot of the moms in my life, so from friends to family to clients that I work with, I constantly try to think about what can I do to encourage and support them in the things that they want to do for themselves as an individual, outside of their role as mom, wife, sister, daughter, whatever those other roles are. But how can I support and encourage and nurture their relationship as an individual?
And, one of the things that I know for sure, a lot of my Black girlfriends are very similar in the fact that we are Hall of Famers at being focused on doing the things, right? Going from one action to the next. And we don't spend a lot of time noticing how we're feeling, right? That somatic process of when something happens or someone says something, whether it's a microaggression or something else, like what is actually happening to you? What is the somatic process that is going on? And let me pause in that moment to actually take that in before my next action. What are some of the things that you found yourself stepping over and then later on recognizing? And I think you told a great story recently, I believe, on your podcast, for sharing when stuff was going on and having to pause and reflect and say, okay, in this moment, here's what I need to do to get through this.
Sheesh. Oh, goodness. I thought of a lot there. I will say for me, again, it all goes back to stillness for me. And I think that being a new mom, it is challenging sometimes to find that time for yourself to be intentional, to be still, if that makes sense. And spending that time to see what thoughts are coming up. Because when you have those moments, it's like, okay, I got a moment. I kind of want to take a nap, right? But I think being with yourself is really important. But I know for me, being so ambitious and like you said, go, go, go. Like you were telling the story about ending one job on a Friday and starting the next on a Monday. Been there, right? Many of us are we're so just ambitious and we want to reach these goals. And I think for me, just going through the challenging stage that I went through a couple months ago, it forced me to sit down and chill, but it also reminded me that it's okay to take a break. It's okay to pause on the side of your journey and regroup and get yourself together. I don't always have to be in go, go, go mode because I realized that I was also trying to stay busy to avoid the thoughts that were coming up, to avoid the silence, to avoid the memories that are coming up from childhood or whatever it might be, because work tends to be a happy place for me. And being busy is sexy sometimes for folks, right? It's like, oh, I'm busy. I have a flight to catch. I'm doing this. And then you don't have time to even sit with those thoughts. So sometimes it's avoidance, right? And so that was something that I learned or relearned or remembered during this last rough patch.
So we're going to have to pause there, avoidance, because we are all rock stars at that, right? Procrastinating the thing that actually is the root cause of a lot of the overwhelm and everything else that we may be experiencing. So Dr. Dunn, from your perspective, either as an individual in a lived experience or from working with your clients, like what's at the root of that avoidance, like particularly as Black women, because I think it shows up very differently for us than it may for others. And so how does that manifest itself?
Yeah, well, I think at the root of it is this lack of wanting to actually take care of ourselves, right? And feeling like we can't. And so if we avoid, if we procrastinate, we think that we're avoiding by filling our cup with all these other things, right? And it feels good initially because, oh, wait, I'm checking off all these items on my to-do list, except for that one thing where I have to sit with my emotions. And we are constantly fed this strong Black woman narrative. And so there's this perception that if we take time to really sit with the emotions that are coming up, then that's counter to the strong Black woman narrative, right? That we have it all together, everything is under control, we are managing ourselves and everyone around us, and everything is great. And that nothing phases us, nothing bothers us, that we can take it all. When in reality, we can't. And really, it takes that strength to say, I'm going to sit in these feelings, because that level of vulnerability is so hard. I often tell my clients, thank you for showing up for therapy, right? Because showing up for therapy is a hard thing to do, because you're making a commitment to be vulnerable, to sit in those uncomfortable emotions, to go through so many moments of discomfort, to get to that space of growth, to get to that insight of what you might be avoiding.
You remind me of Dr. Wes Dominican. I talk about his work with my grandmother's hands quite a bit, and that juxtaposition between resilience and trauma. And I think about that as a lived experience I know for me as a Black woman, and a lot of people that are in my ecosystem, right, is from the earliest days that I can remember, you were taught, don't let them see you sweat. There was some pride in being strong and resilient and not showing the fragility that may show up. And I think sometimes that starts to invade your being, like, right, where you aren't willing to be vulnerable or show weakness or the fragility that is required for you to be able to navigate. And so, Cherie, I wonder for you, like, what are those spaces that you've learned where there's something positive about the resilience that we've shown as Black women to navigate this universe that we're currently navigating, but there's also necessity to be vulnerable?
I just want to make sure I understand the question, Angela. So something positive about being resilient.
Yeah, when does it serve you well and when doesn't it serve you? Because I think sometimes we think resilience serves us well all the time, but I think there's a downside sometimes of being so strong.
For sure, for sure. I'll say for me, sometimes it does give me confidence to know that, you know what, I went through this situation. I have confidence that I'll be able to face this. Like, I've been through a similar situation before. I remember talking to a colleague during the pandemic, and I remember Dom and I were trying to figure out, like everyone else, what's going on. We were still recording content, and we were like, okay, I guess we should cover this COVID thing because it's just kind of popped up in the news. And I chatted with a colleague, and he was like, oh my gosh, this is one of the hardest times of my entire life. Like, he had never gone through any traumatic experiences based on, what he shared. And I remember thinking to myself, like, damn, if I were to lose everything today, God, please don't test me. I don't want it to happen. But if I were to lose everything, I know that I would know how to get back up because I've been there before. Like, I've been homeless, right? I've been in the negative in my bank account. Like, I've gone from nothing to something. And so I know that I can do it again. And so I think that that can be a positive at times, not to end on a negative note, but it can also add some pressure. So I do say to myself, one of the things that I adopted recently was that even though I've gone through things before, it doesn't necessarily mean that I will overcome. So getting help is important. And so letting myself know that it's okay to get help, I think that is the biggest takeaway. And one of the last things I'll say is I remember going to a new therapist, and she talked about how she had a therapist. And that made me feel so good to know that my therapist was also in therapy, because low key, when I used to cry or going to therapy, I was like, I feel so fucking weak. I feel like I should be doing this on my own. Like, why am I sitting here on this couch? Like, what girl, you got this. But then I'm like, no, my therapist has a therapist. And it gave me a sense of pride. Like, it's okay to cry. It's okay to get help, right? So I think it's all about reframing.
Reframing is so important. And it also requires us to understand like why we feel like it would be weak of me to seek therapy. So why, can you pinpoint like what was going on for you that you were feeling that way?
I think the judgment of myself, I definitely am my worst critic. And so I think sometimes it's okay when other people get support, but when I get support, it's like, girl, come on, like you can do this, So it's the judgment of self. It's the minimizing of my own experience sometimes. Like it's not that bad, but then really sitting with it or getting validation from someone else that hears my story or what I'm struggling with. And like, that's a lot, like that, wow. And I'm like, oh shit, that is a lot. Okay. So I think sometimes it's the validation because I've been programmed from childhood to think that if you cry, that's weakness, right? If you get support, then you're not strong, and I got to be strong. So I think it's a constant journey of reframing and reprogramming ourselves based on what we've learned through childhood and from personal experience.
Yeah, I think a lot of that shows up as stereotype threat for many of us, right? Is the judgment that if you are needing to ask for help, then you aren't capable of doing something. And I talk all the time about in undergrad, I went to Stanford undergrad and I didn't go to tutoring because, and I was a student athlete. So I already knew people thought I didn't deserve to be there, right? As an athlete. And I'm a Black woman on this campus and not a lot of people in the classes looking like me. And so I resisted the need, right, to actually go and get the help that was required. And so things were much harder than they needed to be. And it literally was that stereotype. But I didn't want to give someone the pleasure of being able to say, see, maybe she shouldn't be here. And so how does stereotype threat show up for you, if at all, Dr. Dom?
I think now, not so much for me personally. Because like I said earlier, I'm in a space where I'm comfortable with who I am and how I show up in spaces. But I think that there were a lot of times before, like in graduate school, where I felt like, okay, like I remember taking statistics and
oh, Lord. Yeah. You know what? There's those things that you can just say a word and we all understand it.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? And so it was the bane of my existence in graduate school. But I had to constantly remind myself that, you know what? This is part of the journey. Like I need to get through this to get to the bigger goal. And in reality, in the grand scheme of my life, and I usually tell myself this when I'm dealing with other hard things, is that in the grand scheme of my life, this thing is only going to take a tiny portion. And when I look at the grand scheme of my life, do I want to have the most emphasis on this little tiny portion or all of the other big, amazing things that are working well for me?
So focusing on like, right, those good things and giving ourselves, I think so often, all the positive things, they deflect, right? And all the negative things is like Velcro, right? And so how can we shift that mindset? You both on your Cultivating Her Space IG page, you recently had a post and I really love the statement. It was, there is nothing like feeling cozy in your own skin. And so first and foremost, I love that you said cozy and not comfortable. Like there was just something that made me think about a fire and a nice warm blanket and some hot chocolate or like cozy in your own skin in a way that comfortable is just feels different, right? And I just am curious for both of you was there a time where you weren't cozy in your own skin? And what was that like? We've talked a little bit about it, but like, what was the feeling?
I was going to say, I just had a baby, so this is fresh for me. Let me just say that I worked so hard in grad school on my confidence. And I think at one point I was like, oh my gosh, I did it. I'm confident, because it went from very negative self-talk to just more self-love. And I could see the way that other people could see that I loved myself more. And there was part of me that thought that it was like set it and forget it. So I was like, oh, I'm good. And then years went by and I was like, oh, I need to put those affirmations back up. So it is a journey. I'll say that. But I think in this last phase for me, it's been wild. I mean, having a child and seeing all of the changes that your body goes through in pregnancy and then postpartum. And I was telling, our listeners that I've been trying to work off and release this belly weight for the longest. And so I was struggling to do it on my own, and I kept struggling, and I was on the mark, and I fell off plenty of times. And so I decided to drop a bag and get a trainer, because I know what I need to be accountable. And so I've done that, and I'm really loving and being a lot more cozier in my body now. It's not perfect. Like, I'm not 100% there, but it's a process, right? I'm a lot cozier than I was before, and I'm loving, looking in the mirror a lot more, but it's definitely a journey. But you talked about, what did it feel like when I was uncomfortable, not wanting to look in the mirror, thinking that it was going to be forever, judgment, especially with social media and snapback culture. My mom snapped back. She had 5 babies out of her body, and she snapped back with my siblings. I not so much. For some people, they might say, oh, you did. But for me and my standard of snapback, I was like, mm-mm. So I think social media as well, and seeing those images that are displayed online, and it was uncomfortable. And what I said to myself, I gave myself some time and space, of course, to heal. But then I was like, okay, if you don't like something, what are you going to do to change it? Are you going to own it, or are you going to do something to change it? Whether it's whatever it might be for me, right? Whether it's surgery, whether it's working out, whether it's changing the diet, deciding within yourself, okay, I'm not going to complain about this in perpetuity. I need to do something about it and be the victor of my story. So that's what I did.
The victor of my story. I love that. Dr. Dom, for you, like, what were those moments, and what did it feel like when you weren't cozy in your own skin?
Not being cozy feels hard as hell. Yes. And to me, there were various points in life where I was depressed. And at the time, even as a therapist, at the time, I didn't necessarily recognize that I was depressed, because I was what you would call like high functioning depression. That's the term that people hear about, right? Because I was getting up in the morning, I was going to work, I was doing all the things, but inside I wasn't happy. And when I'm not cozy with myself, I don't eat well, I'm not working out. Sometimes I don't really want to be around other people, because I don't want them to see me. I don't want them, even if I do my best to hide it, I don't want them to be able to pick up any sense of I'm not in a good space. And so I think where I am in life now, like, I really try to tap into that, and I try to pay attention to how are things going for me. Like, recently I had like a lot going on, and life was lifing. And it was all great things, but it was a lot happening at once. And I had to really tune in to make sure that I wasn't burning out, because I was doing all this stuff, and it was like, oh, everybody's excited to be outside, right? And had so many celebratory things happening. But at some point within that, I needed to slow down and needed to step back and see, while all of these things that are happening are great, somewhere in there you aren't making time for you. You aren't making time to fill your cup in the way that you normally do, that normally sustains you.
Filling your cup so it sustains you. And, one of the things that I'm hearing from both of you, Terri, you talked a lot about like that judgment, like, right? The internal, external judgment that shows up sometimes when we don't feel cozy in our own skin. You both also talked about how sometimes, like, we can be functioning, right, with all these things that are happening, but you may like remove yourself from living in certain ways. So you're choosing not to spend time with your friends or your family, or you choose not to do the things that you love or the things that do fill your cup. Oftentimes for me, I do the opposite, like, right, of what I want to or need to be doing in those moments when I'm not cozy or comfortable with where I am. And so what are some things that you can do, Dr. Dom and Terri, just to shift that, like to reframe, to pause, and to start moving in the opposite direction?
I think the pause is so important, right? Because, and I think also when you're in tune with who you are, you notice the shifts, right? So like, as I was talking about, like just a few months ago when life was lifing, I noticed the shift. And I paused and said, wait, hold on. What am I not doing that I normally do? What have I removed, right? And so just taking that time to pause and remind myself, one of the key things for me is sleep. I preach it all the time. Sleep. I love a good night's rest does the body good, like all the time. Yeah. And because now I'm so in tune with myself, I can start to recognize what happens for me when I don't have enough sleep, or when I don't have some of the other things that fill my cup. Like being able to spend time with family and friends fills my cup. And so when I don't have that, I notice that my mood changes. And so usually, again, because I'm more in tune with myself, after 1 or 2 days, I'm like, wait, something doesn't feel right. Let me pause and let me figure out what is off. Yeah. And what adjustments I need to make to get back on track.
I was gonna say, I wanted to piggyback off of what Dom shared, because when we were both going through life was life, and for both of us, one of the great things about being self-aware is that you can communicate that with other people. So I wasn't available for phone calls with friends the way that I normally would be, because I had so much going on, COVID and moving and, baby, and all these things. And so I think communicating with other people so they know how to support you, or they just know, okay, she's going to be MIA for a little bit. So they know that, not to get offended or not to be mean about it if you disappear. So I think that's also really important.
No, that is a very important perspective as well. And there's one thing that I noticed that the three of us actually referenced, and it was our experience on college campuses as Black women. And I want to unpack and maybe unlock this a little bit too, because while like two things can be true, right? We can have a great experience and get all the things that we need to help us with our career. And we also can experience harm or trauma or these things that may feel dormant in the moment, but they're there and we're having to navigate them in a way that actually isn't healthy. And so for those of our listeners that are going to grad school or in undergrad right now, I'm just curious, as a Black woman navigating higher education and trying to unlock that club, again, in spaces that we thrive in, but maybe sometimes people don't feel like we belong in. Like how, Terri, can you navigate that sort of space? What was a key to your success navigating that space?
To be honest, and this is very transparent, I was oblivious to a lot back at that time. I think the world was a different place then, for me at least, because I think we weren't as woke. A lot of people were not having many of these conversations. And so I'm sure there was stuff that I was not even aware of that happened. And I was just like, oh, a lot of times it was like, oh, I'm just happy to be here, right? But if I were to go to school now, it'd be way different. I will say that I did not play about my studies. Like I was building relationships with my professors. They was going to know my name, and I was staying after class to chat with them. So they're like, okay, you see that name? This is the face that goes to that name. I want to understand the content. I want to build that rapport, because it actually helped me when there was an opportunity to like push my grade up a little bit. My professor knew who I was, and I was able to email him like I was so close, extra credit. And he was like, you know what? Merry Christmas. And so I was like, oh, this is cool. So little things like that, building a rapport with your professors, I think is key. I think also tapping into student resources on campus, that was also really important for me. So I was a part of different organizations and resource groups for I wanted to at-risk teens at the time that I went to college. And then it was just for marginalized youth. And so that was really helpful for me as well, as far as exposure and networking, and also working on campus, working a campus job. That was also really, really key for me getting tapped in. I'm going to pass it to Dom for some other tips too.
Well, I'm going to jump in too, because there's some threads there that I think are really important. And there's some great resources now, because you're right, things have evolved, particularly for first generation students, right, who don't have somebody that they can call and say, okay, how do I do this? What am I supposed to do? But what you're speaking to a lot is social capital. For us as again, those that are historically excluded or marginalized, we have to be better than everybody else, right? So we're trying to get the grades, do the best we can in the classroom, but what we don't recognize is how important social capital was. And so, Terri, you did a great job of building that social capital with professors and colleagues.
Thank you. That is so true too. On point.
Dr. Dom, how about you?
So I can speak from two perspectives, my personal perspective, and my entire career has been on college campuses. And so this is the work that I do, and trying to get young Black folks to really engage with their campus and get the most out of their campus. But my role has either been in the classroom or in the counseling center. And in addition to all of the things, the resources and things that Terri mentioned, I would add, go see a therapist, especially if you're looking for a Black therapist. If there's a Black therapist on your campus, go and see them, because chances are they're willing to be there for you and they recognize the importance of showing up for you. I would also say seeking out mentors, and it doesn't have to be a mentor in your degree or your major, but finding out who the other Black faculty and staff are on your campus, because those are huge resources. And then also figuring out what your area of interests are and honing in on that. So if you are into art, go join that art club. If you are into learning Mandarin, join the club where they're speaking Mandarin. So find the things, even if it's something that feels like it doesn't fit in the traditional idea of what it means to be Black, find the things that make you comfortable. But the top thing is always to seek out the resources. So going to your Black faculty and staff, because especially those who have been there for a while, because they know all the tea. They know. And they are the ones who, when shit hits the fan, because at some point for all of us it does, they are the ones who will have your back and help you navigate it.
Yeah. Right. And don't expect them to always come out and find you, right? Because that is the expectation, right? Because oftentimes they're one of few, if any, right? And so you actively go seek out and meet them halfway.
Yes. And when you seek them out, they are more than happy to see you and will do what they can. I think for me personally, what helped was I had in graduate school in my department, we had what was called the Black Girls Club. And we made sure that we cultivated a space for the Black women in our program to support one another from things that were happening within our department, but also on a personal level. So I was also a part of the Black Student Union and the Black Graduate Students Program. And so just finding those things that can help you thrive, because school is hard. Higher education is not easy, particularly graduate school. It's not easy. And so making sure that, like Angela, like you mentioned, that social capital is just as important as getting through your academics. That social capital helps you get through your academics.
Yeah. As Terri said, I wish I would have known you back in the day when I was like refusing to go get help and ask for help with the TAs and the professors. There's this thought, I'm listening to you both, and you both are remarkable, brilliant individuals, and so honored to be in this conversation with you today. And I think about so often people see, again, our accomplishments and our achievements and think that you've arrived, you're comfortable, you're happy, you're not having to fight the current to kind of get into the club. And so, is there a club, Terri, that you're trying to get in and unlock? And who's the gatekeeper to that club, whether it's in branding or, Dr. Dom in higher education as a professor and being tenured, or in psychology? We know there aren't a lot of Black therapists necessarily. What are some of those clubs that you both have been trying to navigate and unlock? And what have you found is the obstacle or the obstruction to you getting in?
Ooh, that's a question.
Really good one. I'm like, dang, you stumped me with that one.
I think, so I'm no longer pursuing tenure. And I think I had to get to a space where I was comfortable with that and recognizing that in my journey, that was not for me.
Okay.
But that is a club that is incredibly hard to get into and requires a lot. And I wasn't willing to continue down that path. Mm. And that was a decision that I had to make for myself and be comfortable with that.
And what was it that got you to that? Because I think that's an important piece, because we're sometimes banging our head against this wall trying to get into a club. And you know what? Let's go ahead and create our Blatchet Club over here, where we're welcome.
Yes. I think what helped me realize that was I applied for a job that I didn't get. And that rejection was a moment for me to pause and reflect, like we've been talking about, right? And it was an opportunity for me to acknowledge, did I really want to be a part of this club in the first place?
Yes.
Like, I'm lightweight upset, but I'm not devastated. So did I really want to be a part of this club?
Yes.
And when I gave myself that time to pause and reflect, I realized two things. One, I didn't really want to be a part of this club. And two, that this door is closing because there's another door that I'm supposed to be going into that I don't see yet. So I'm going to sit with this and I'm going to be okay with this.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Lightweight, upset, but not devastated. Right?
Yes.
Like that club isn't for me. Right?
Yes.
That club is not for me. Let me go ahead and create my own club. Terri, how about for you? Like, were there some clubs that you've been trying to unlock? Who were the gatekeepers for those clubs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'm the gatekeeper of the club. I would say for me, the club is financial independence, like financial freedom. I've been wanting that since I was a teenager. And there's definitely part of me that's like, girl, we didn't get there yet. But I think there are still lessons I need to learn that'll get me to that place. And even having multiple streams of income, I'm not at that place yet, which sometimes is frustrating, especially when you get into the comparison game and you see other people, you're like, wait, but they did this. So that's something I'm working through now, is trying to really figure out, just grounding myself in what does my ideal life look like, and then working backwards to manifest that. That is high priority. There's so much I want to do in the world, and it's going to require me to have that stable financial economic base to be able to go out and do those things.
The financial freedom, it's freedom, like empowering,
Yes.
right? And staying true to yourself requires you to give yourself grace.
Exactly.
In those moments. Well, this has been a great conversation. We're going to take a quick break here on Unlocking the Club, and we will be right back with Terri Lomax and Dr. Dominique Broussard for the back nine here on Unlocking the Club. Do you want to stop feeling like you have little to no control over your life's journey and instead amplify your life's purpose? You all know me as Angela Taylor, host of the Unlocking the Club podcast, but I am also a business, career, life, and leadership coach, helping my clients to live their best life. Every day, I help my clients discover what they truly want in life, and then unlock the club on how they can live their best life. If you're like many of my clients, you have found yourself over the years prioritizing everyone else and everything else. Your job, your significant other, your family, your friends, your community, the list goes on and on. Well, I'm here to tell you the best thing you can do for others is to invest in yourself. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't need to succumb to the fear of failure. You don't have to be perfect. You don't need to feel like you're being selfish. You simply need to prioritize you. You may be thinking that coaching is for other people, but trust me when I say that we all could benefit from a good coaching relationship. Together, we'll build a plan to help you amplify your gifts, clarify your goals, and accelerate your journey toward the life you desire, which may be finding financial wealth, spiritual health, relationship success, and/or freedom and flexibility. You no longer have to feel like you aren't welcome into someone else's club. Let me empower you to leverage all of your extraordinary gifts and create your own club. Head on over to unlockingtheclub.com to book a free 20-minute introductory call to learn more about our Unlocking Your Journey coaching packages, or use code UNLOCK to get a 15% discount on the 6-month coaching package. Today is the day to invest in yourself. Let's unlock your journey. All right, welcome back to Unlocking the Club. I'm your host, Angela Taylor. We're here with the co-host for the Cultivating Her Space podcast, Dr. Dominique Broussard and Terri Lomax, having an amazing discourse about what is required for us to be true to ourselves, to unlock our own clubs and be Blatchet. And so the first question I want to throw out there is, how would you encourage our listeners to find out what their own definition of being Blatchet is? Terri, how about you start us off?
I would say exploration, because it's going to differ between person and person. So I would say go out and just have as many new experiences as possible and keep doing the ones that you enjoy.
Dr. Dom?
I mean, I echo that. Like, I couldn't have said it better. Like, exploration, yes, discovering yourself and being honest with yourself about the things that you enjoy. The key to being Blatchet is there's no judgment on the things that you enjoy.
No judgment at all. Well, this is for both of you, but we'll start with Dr. Dom. Besides your own home, what is the place that you feel safest to be yourself?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. 2 places. When I'm talking to my best friend, we've been friends since we were 9. Mm-hmm. So when I'm talking to her, and then on the podcast, when Terri and I are having our authentic conversations.
I get the sense that that is certainly true. You have a lot of fun talking about anything and everything. That's fantastic. Terri, but how about you?
Okay, I have 3. So the podcast for sure, that we have a special vibe that we built there. Definitely conversations with my bestie. And then Twerk Church, which is a twerk class in the Bay. Shout out to Free the Cheeks. And that is a free place where women can go to just shake their ass in a safe space. You don't have to worry about anybody trying to get up on you. It's just such a positive, freeing, liberating experience.
All right. We are going to include that in our show notes so that if you're in the Bay Area, you can certainly find yourself in that space. It sounds like an amazing space. Again, for both of you, what is a situation that you used to walk into with trepidation that you no longer do?
Off the top of my head, what just came to mind was I still walk in with trepidation, but I do it anyway. So I feel the fear and do it anyway. And for me, that's like conflict or difficult conversations. They always give me anxiety, but I have tools in place, so templates and affirmations and mantras that help me navigate it, because it is really important to advocate for ourselves and to have those, I like to call them impactful conversations versus difficult conversations. But that is something that I still get nervous when I do it, but it has to be done.
Well, I love the reframing, right? You feel the fear and you do it anyway. And that is something that I think I don't know anybody that loves, right, those difficult conversations or does them well, but still doing them, right? Because if we don't have those conversations, it's not going anywhere for us. Dr. Dom, how about you? What did you used to walk into with trepidation and now you don't?
In addition to those difficult or uncomfortable conversations, because I used to be an avoider, that's how I can recognize it. I would also say work. I used to have trepidation in the workspace because I wasn't confident in who I was. Well, no, I was confident in who I was. I wasn't confident in being my authentic self in those spaces. And so there was trepidation. And now I'm my whole self and there's no trepidation.
Love it. Love it. Where do you both find time and the space to center yourself? And what do you do in order to be in that mindful state?
I'm going to just quickly name a couple. Going to the gym has been a new thing for me. So I was up at 6 or up at 5 something to go to the gym this morning. And that was really therapeutic and helpful. I would also say late night stretches, bath time for myself, and hanging out with my girlfriends.
Awesome. Awesome. How about you, Dr. Dom?
I would say therapy when I make time to read. So even though I'm not necessarily focusing on myself, it feels almost meditative because I am dedicating time to really just be in that space, not answering the phone, none of that. And that's a time for me to just pour into me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, last question. I could be in conversation with you both for a long time, but where can our listeners find you?
Yes, you can find us on social media at H.E.R Space Podcast, herspacepodcast.com. We release episodes every single Friday, like clockwork. We talk about everything from fibroids to fake friends, all that good stuff. And if you want to reach out to me personally, I'm at Terri Lomax on social media, and my website is terrilomax.com.
Awesome. Dr. Dom, where can we find you?
Yes, so to find me personally, I'm at the.dr.dom. And then my website is drdominiquebroussard.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, and make sure, go to their website, find them on Instagram. We'll have it in our show notes, and it's at the bottom of the screen if you're watching it on YouTube. They have a Patreon site where you get exclusive content as well, merchandise. You definitely want to have these two amazing women in your life as your guiding light to the journey that you are all on. And so Dr. Dominique Broussard and Terri Lomax, thank you both so much for joining me on today's episode of Unlocking the Club.
Thank you so much, Angela. This was an amazing experience.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I certainly am looking forward to continuing to listen to those Friday drops of the Cultivating Her Space podcast. Her stands for healing, empowerment, and resiliency. And we all know as Black women how important all of those things are to us and how they play a role in our day-to-day existence in this life. So again, I'm grateful to our guests today, Terri Lomax and Dr. Dominique Broussard of the Cultivating Her Space podcast for joining us on today's episode of Unlocking the Club. My name is Angela Taylor. I'm your host for Unlocking the Club. If you enjoyed today's conversation and you want to keep it going, join us in our Code Breakers community over on our Facebook page, the Code Breakers Lounge. The Code Breakers Lounge is a space where you are seen and heard. So come through to connect, be inspired, be supported, and unlock your power. You can find the Code Breakers Lounge. Search for Unlocking the Club or the Code Breakers Lounge on Facebook, and we look forward to unlocking the club for you and with you. That's it for this episode of Unlocking the Club. Again, I'm your host, Angela Taylor. And until next time, be well.
Thanks for listening to Unlocking the Club. If this conversation resonated with you, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or your favorite streaming platform so that you can experience every episode. And follow us on social media, where you'll hear about future guests, access special features, and connect with this amazing community. Head on over there and let us know how you are unlocking the club. Until next time, peace.